Welcome to Constant Variables, a podcast where we take a non-technical look at mobile app development. I'm Tim Bornholt. Let's get nerdy. Today we are chatting with Rhamy Alejeal of People Processes. Rhamy and his team work with hundreds of companies across the United States, helping them learn how to stop pushing paper and start prioritizing people. It's a lot of P's, alliteration. In this episode, we dive deep into automation, and specifically, we focus around how you can automate your HR process. Rhamy gives us a really great exercise you can do right now, which will help you get going down the path towards automating your business. Also in the episode, we talk about how to get automation started in your business, whether that's a company of 10 people or 10,000 people. And I'm introduced to a new phrase that is going to change my life. It's going to replace the phrase one-stop shop. It's right towards the end. You don't want to miss it. So without further ado, here is my interview with Rhamy Alejeal. Rhamy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here, Tim.
Awesome. You know, we were talking before the show about how we've been listening to each other's podcasts, and you start every podcast interview with a question that I just loved, where you and the way you phrase it just made me laugh every time I listened to it, about how, you know, not very many little boys and girls dress up to become HR people.
Yeah.
And I thought that was brilliant. So in the same vein, you know, how did you get into the world of HR? Were you the one that was actually dressing up as an HR representative?
Believe it or not, yeah.
Really?
So I'm from a long line of, but it's actually insurance is where we started. My grandmother was an insurance agent. My mother was an insurance agent. And I loved my grandmother. We spent a lot of time together. But as I got older, I wanted to spend the night at her house more. And she would never let me do that during the week, because being a commission sales insurance person, she had to cold call on weeknights. And so when I was 13, I was like, Gran, no, let me spend the night. I'll cold call for you. It'll be great. I'll cold call. How hard could it be? And she goes, oh, Rhamy, you can't cold call. I'm calling 65-year-olds to talk to them about Medicare, about, you know, like their new insurance coming up. You can't just do that. And I was like, I can do it. And she gave me 24 cassettes in a big folder and a licensed training manual. It's like, well, if you read all of that and listen to the cassettes, I'll let you try. And I think she thought that'd be the end of it. But 2 weeks later, I was like, I'm done. Let's do this thing. And I cold called seniors for Medicare supplements starting at age 13 for about 2.5 years before it turns out like that's totally illegal and you gotta have to be licensed and an adult but my grandmother let me do it for her. So 2 nights a week and Saturdays, I would call Medicare. I'd call everyone in a zip code turning 65 on these old line printer, like you rip the edges off the sheet, green and white stacks of paper. We'd get them every month, everyone turning 65 in a zip code. And I would call all of them and say, hey, you should meet with my grandmother. She's going to talk to you about Medicare. And it was shockingly successful. Turns out 13-year-olds calling 65-year-olds say, my grandmother wants to meet with you. Just printed money. I mean, printed money. So that started my fascination. My grandmother she was my grand. She was old, but turns out she was like in her 40s. But somehow she was able to pick me up from school at 2:00, and I could always spend time with her. Well, you know, in my head, I was like, oh, that's just what grandmothers do. But in actuality, you know, that's what someone who had built a career with renewals and had a long client list was able to do. She was able to spend time with her family. And by the time I started realizing that, I said, okay, this is the world I want to go into. I got bachelor's degrees in finance and economics with minors in physics and math, because that's what you do if you want to be an insurance agent. And and set up my company at 22 to do insurance, and rapidly niched into employee benefits. And within a year realized that while you got to be good at the benefits side of things, you got to know your actual policies and have markets and not be an idiot. That's not the bar. What you really had to do was actually provide significantly more value in terms of how do you communicate these things? What is the purpose of the benefits? Why are we trying to attract and retain great talent? And that moved me into the HR space. Even though I was still benefits, it was all about attracting and retaining good talent. Within a few years, we had full payroll operations, HR consulting, communications design, onboarding, recruiting systems, and that's the transition. It was, I just want to sell some insurance in the beginning, but within just a few years, it was like, okay, the way we're gonna actually make a mark is by being a HR expert. And benefits is a component. It's still about 25% of my business. We love it. It's still a big part of why people stick with jobs. But it's become a one tool among many in the HR world.
Well, it's funny, like, business in general, like you think you go down one path, and it's funny how you just kind of, as an entrepreneur, you see the problems and you start to go towards it. But it's funny, like at the end of the day, all these problems, it all comes back to people at the end of the day. Like if you can be a good communicator and you can help people solve problems, it's like, it's fascinating that you were able to turn it into seeing where, instead of just providing the baseline value, that you're able to talk with people, figure out how to actually solve problems, go above and beyond, and grow your business to be as successful as it is today.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Communication is everything. There's actually a great study, and it's old now. It was 2008, something like that. But I referenced it a lot in the beginning of my business. But it was actually taking some different union shops that had, in similar industries, in similar areas economically, and they had different benefits plans. And they asked the employees to rate communication, like how well do you understand it? How do you know, where do you feel like how did they communicate it with you? In 2008, the internet was still like, oh, how do we handle this? People were faxing applications. But
people still fax applications. It's ridiculous.
It's crazy. But the bottom line is they actually, the satisfaction with the employees' benefits was almost entirely uncorrelated to the benefit themselves. It was like 90% of an employee's, whether they think they have good insurance or not, was around communication. Basically, for every dollar that was spent on communication, simplification, your actual enrollment experience, you were receiving, in terms of employer spend, almost $250 in benefit. You could have increased the cost of the benefits by $250 to the company per employee, or spent $1 an employee on color paper, right? It's like crazy amount difference. And that's what that kind of, I read that. I'm a nerd. I actually read academic journals, and I read that 2 years into my business, and was like, you know what? That's so right. It's not about, it is, you got to have good insurance. I'm not knocking it, but communication changes everything. And that's where we differentiated and grew from.
Oh, absolutely. Well, changing gears slightly, one of the big things that we talk about on this show is automation, technology, and it's really geared towards non-technical people. But, as a business owner, I'm sure, we all have a million things that we need to do when we're running our business. And I'm sure a lot of people think that they would like to have these tasks, automated. What do you tell people? Like, why should a business owner care about going about automating just things in general, and then getting specifically into some of the HR things that you do? Why should anybody care about that?
Well, there's kind of two layers to that. Why should you care about automation or processes in general? And why should you care about HR? And I'll take them one at a time. Let's go with the broad processes. Most business owners know they have to define their operations processes. Whatever business you're in, whether it's making apps, doing taxes, running a daycare, you have to have a process to deliver that actual good. You may have a sales process, a marketing process, but the first process people get familiar with is, I think if you use the example, this was all, everyone's read the E-Myth Revisited. Or not everyone, but a lot of people have. And I think the example he uses is making a pie, right? You can't sell pies until you write down the recipe to have a consistent product. And it's not, and that is a huge part of it, have a consistent product. But why is that important, and why does that actually grow your business? Because by having a consistent process, you can improve it and measure it. And unless you actually consistently do the same thing over and over, you're never able to apply the scientific method and improve over time. If I change this, what will I get? How can I improve it over time? I have to update my process and repeat it and repeat it. Automation is the next step of that. The process itself is outstanding to have, and you got to, you can have it on a piece of paper and we're going to follow the process. That's a start. But the more time you spend doing the process, the less time you're spending improving the process. So normally the outsized impact of automation is not so much that it, quote unquote, saves you the time you would have normally spent manually updating your CRM or paper onboarding an employee. It does do that, and that is an immediate return on investment. The bigger thing is you can then spend that time improving the process that is now automated, making tweaks, growing it, doing it better, communicating it better. And that will have a ridiculous return on investment. That's why automation is worthwhile investment, even for small companies, because it gives you the ability to improve them over time.
And how about specifically related to HR then? Like, are there certain things about HR that you see as kind of low hanging fruit that people go to automate right away?
Absolutely. I mean, HR is one of those kind of legacy parts of businesses. People understand, or business owners understand, they have to lower their marginal cost for delivering their product or for acquiring a new client. They see the immediate return by automation or in processing those pieces. HR, for some reason, gets left behind, even though your people are the ones who execute the vast majority of those deliverables. So the investment into automating HR, again, allows you to improve your HR. And the reason that's important, there's really two. One is, of course, your labor is often one of your highest, if not your highest expense. Even if it's not necessarily a variable expense, when you look at your costs over the course of the year to deliver your product or service, labor is a huge part of it. So anything you can do to get more return out of that labor investment is outstanding. The way you get more return is through retention, keeping good people and making them better. That makes that the return, like if you think about hiring someone fresh to work in your development, a new college kid, new college graduate, who knows the technical skills but doesn't have the work experience. It may take you 18 months for them to even really be, if you're just in kind of a standard small business, for them to even really have their head around what's going on and be reliable. Moving that from 18 months to 3 months is a huge return. But even more than that, by automating, you can continually improve that skill set and that knowledge of your culture and understanding over the months and years to follow. Because again, automation lets you work on the process so it can repeat and grow, as opposed to just putting a little bit of effort in right at the beginning, bunch of manual work, and now after that it's like, all right, you figure it out, you're part of the team now, buddy. You can automate those things and grow them. So HR super benefits from automation. I mean, the reason the business owners often don't see it is because while the rate of return is incredibly high, it's slow because you have to implement it. You got to get your people trained on it. And often you're trying to improve humans or improve your humans' love of your company and their ability to make decisions when you're not there. These are the goals of good people processes, as we call them. But that takes some time, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months to really start seeing the outsized impact. And the impact will be outstanding. But I think that's why it's a little bit lower on the list. They may have a much more pending, pressing problem in I can't get the damn pie out the door every week, right?
Well, and that's fair. I mean, I guess I could see that to a point, but I also think I guess we all are emotional by nature, but I think rationally thinking, if you can get me a student right out of college from 18 months trained up to just 3 months, I mean, I would take that every day. So when you're talking about those, big improvements like that, what do you do? How do you get started making those? Are there like quick, easy, big things that you can knock out, or is this like a painful, go meditate on a rock and come back and have the enlightenment done so that you figure it out? Like how do you get going on that?
No, it's a process, man. It's not even it's a checklist, and it blows me away that people don't follow. I tell we worry about compliance a lot in our world. Employees are wrought with lawsuits. And I tell my clients, compliance is a spectrum. I want you to meet every letter of every law out there. But right now, you could put in 20% of the effort and get you 80% of the way there. Stop. Don't pay people under the table. This is an easy thing, right? Right. You can get the easy stuff out of the way and have a huge outsized impact. And then from that growth, now we have a little bit more time to deal with the, compliance A/B testing of your communication material. We'll get to that one day. For now, let's hire people as employees instead of independent contractors when the government says they're employees, right? Let's get the easy stuff out of the way. I think with HR, the general process is to first think about it. I'm sure it is when you design an automated process in an app. What are you trying to do? So we start with a goal. Then we evaluate the procedures or the things you do. Some people don't really have a process. They just have, when I hire people, I do these 6 things sometimes and these 6 things sometimes. And it's kind of a brainstorming idea to start with. But we figure out, what is it you do now? And then we look at that goal. Perhaps the goal is to have a quicker time to reliability or usefulness for your employees. Maybe the goal is to keep employees who've stuck around for a while and manage through osmosis to figure this stuff out. We sure don't want them to leave now that it's been 3 years and they've learned everything. Whatever that goal is, look at what you do. And I think most business owners, 99%, they're not stupid. They may not be smart in the traditional way, but they're not stupid. If they take even 20 minutes to say, what's the goal of any given what we call employee event, whether that's onboarding, training, annual performance evaluations, heck, why do we have parties? What's the goal of this thing? And then look at what they do. They'll immediately see a gap, right? You're right. We hire people and we tell them we care about them, and we go to lunch with them on the first day. And then they ask Jeff in the cubicle next to them, what happens if I get sick? Where do I tell people that? They don't have any process in place or a way of communicating that they care about the employee. They complain, business owner may complain, every time I leave the office, nobody seems to get any work done. Or they're constantly calling me and saying, hey, boss man, what do I do about this? What do I, where do I make how do I do this? What's the right answer here? And then you go, okay, so the goal is that people can be more independent and they can make decisions like you would if you were there. To do that, they're going to need to know the actual skills, which maybe they already do, but they also need to know what is your guiding principle in making these decisions. Perhaps we should communicate that. So we write it down. And I'm a tech guy, but I start by what the heck is it we're going to try to do? What are the steps we're going to follow? Let's turn it into paper. And then we automate it. I'm sure with an app, it's a similar thing. What are the forms? What's the database design? What is it we're trying to accomplish? Set a goal, and then we're trying to turn that into simplicity and automation.
Well, yeah, it's like I always say with app development, it's like if you can take out a piece of paper and write it down, that's going to take you, 10 minutes. And if you try to put that into Photoshop, it's going to take you, an hour or 2 hours. And then if you try to put it into code, it's going to take 10 hours. So you have to kind of start small, and just having it written down, I'm sure, is like a huge first step to actually getting things going.
Exactly. So if I could give your listeners advice, they say, I don't want to read this guy's book. I don't want to check him out. Here I am listening. I gotta get this crap straight. I know that I feel the same problems. I've got employees, but they're not growing. They're either not sticking around, or if they do stick around, they don't seem to be getting better fast enough. I can't trust them when my back is turned. Here's what you do. I want you to take out a piece of paper and I want you to write recruiting, onboarding, training, evaluation. And then you can put compensation over there on the far right. Compensation's hard for small businesses because they're kind of limited. in that a lot of times. Like, I pay what I can, man. They all make more money than me. And if you're in that boat, then just put compensation over on the right. We'll come to that one day. Go look at each one of those 4 steps: recruiting, onboarding, training, and performance evaluation, and think about what your goal is. When you're recruiting, what is your goal? Is it to get a body? Is it to get the best possible, like most experienced, already knows everything, walks through the door and takes over person? Or is it, my goal is to find that diamond in the rough that I know I can't steal them from IBM, but I gotta get somebody who I can train. So I need someone that's moldable, who's trustworthy. Write your goal. Then below that, write or pull your pieces of paper out or go look at your online system. What do you do now? And then I just want you to write under that, what's 2 things that you could do to get you closer to that goal? If you need help, you can always reach out to us. But most people, again, they're not even at that. They haven't even done that little bit of effort that'll get them an outsized impact. They'll immediately go, oh, you know what we should do? When we recruit people, we should actually like tell them what the job is that they're going to do in detail, right? We should have a job description that covers the legal side of things, but we really should talk about, in what we're recruiting, the way the employee will be judged. And maybe we should talk about with the employee, or in our job description, like what the goal of the position is, like what's the guiding, like, I'm hiring you to do the following things. And the reason is I need to get the hell out of this office by 7 p.m. on Friday. Tell them, put that in there. And just by looking at each one of those steps, recruiting, go with onboarding. Now you got to hire. You've figured out, you got somebody in. What are we going to do for onboarding? What is it you do now? Write that first. Compare it to your goal. Is the goal of onboarding to get them to be useful to you as soon as possible? Is it to make sure that they can make decisions when you're not there? Is it to create a harmonious atmosphere and make sure that they we know maybe it's a position that there's no way they're a brain surgeon. You're hiring them. The goal is that in 3 years they don't kill people. Okay. All right, cool. That's so the top goal of onboarding then is make sure they don't leave in 3 months to go be a farmer. It's to make sure that they are willing to stick out the 3 years of crap pay where we just have to train them. What are we going to do here? So put that goal up there, look at what you do, and you'll come up with 3 things. During onboarding, you know what we really should do? We should do these things. So look at those sections, write those down, and you got to start. You've got something that you can improve. You've already made a process. What did you do before? That's hard enough for a lot of people. What are 2 things that you're going to add to or replace to improve it? On each one of those, and you'll already be well on your way. Once you start scaling and you're having to do each one of those things 10 or 15 times a quarter, you got to onboard people, or hell, a year, whatever your organization requires, then you start thinking about, all right, those are the steps I follow. I've improved them. How do I stop making them be a time sink so that I can actually improve them further?
I jumped into business at a weird time, like very young, and I just wanted to build apps, right? Like, I didn't think that there would be a whole lot of like sales process or any of this stuff, and it's funny because like you'd think as a developer, we're all day, I think, in systems, and I think about algorithms and how to make things work efficiently within apps, that I would apply that same principle to my business, but we just didn't for whatever reason. Oh, yeah. And we decided one day that we should actually go into a whiteboard and just write out all of the sales prospects that we have. Because my business partner and I, it was just whoever was looking at the email at the time would just respond to it. And, we had 2 different processes. It was just whatever we go in there, and we decided, why don't we just make like a list? And it was like, 30 people deep of, it's like, oh yeah, that guy reached out to me 6 months ago, or, oh yeah, that guy or this girl. And we ended up making a list, and that process turned into a Google Doc or a Google Sheet that then turned into, we were like, well, we could build this into a website. And then we turned it into our own custom website that worked for our process. And then it's like, hey, well, we can turn that into an app. And that's what we're working on now. And it's like that exact process of just start by just documenting it. Just what do you do now? And even that, it's probably painful. It was really painful and embarrassing for us. to be like, oh my God, why haven't we been doing this whole time? But then you see the benefits of just even writing it down, so that if you get sick and your business partner needs to take over for you or whatever, like just having it written somewhere and out of your head is exactly like you said. It's the exact right first step to getting something automated. And then from there you can improve and find out what sucks in your process and how can you make it better.
When I started and even now, my board of advisors, we call it, is primarily my little sisters, my little brother, and my parents, and then like some people who over time we've added some great clients and friends. But the board started as, guys, I got crap in my head and it's not going anywhere. I think that people, not everybody, but I think there's thoughts in my head. I have words. I know how we do things, but by explaining it to another human, by talking out loud, it cements it. It gives you, okay, that's what's actually happening. And then by writing it down, it forces your brain to go, oh, that's what's happening. And now, again, if you're a 500-man company and you obviously already know a lot of processes, maybe the place to start isn't with a blank sheet of paper and figuring out where you did, and maybe you need more in-depth stuff. But I think for the majority of businesses out there, 95+%, it's just that the owner hasn't turned. And you're probably in this boat, Tim. You built a company. Your first few years, you're just out there trying to get business. And as the CEO or the founder, it's like, my job is to go out there and get business, make promises, and then come back and hopefully fulfill them. And do my damnedest to get them done. And eventually they turn and look at the process itself of delivering the product. And then they start going, oh, okay, I could hire somebody. They could handle this little piece, or they could handle this piece. And you start growing and scaling through that amazing power of labor arbitrage. I mean, it's outstanding to hire other people to do parts of your business. We love it. But it's still an external focus. It's still, how do we deliver? It's still, what's the problem with the process, the product itself? Over time, that problem becomes much more a who problem. In businesses, you can be like an Uber driver, you can be a self-employed, single client person. You can be a person who owns their own job. Like maybe you're the concrete contractor and you own the truck and you bring in help, but you're still at every job. You're still the guy. But eventually, every problem becomes a who problem. Who's going to do this? How do I find someone who's going to take care of it? How do I make sure they're set up for success? And when you start moving to that view of who, that's when turning those HR automations on, making sure that you've got this straight, just starts. It'll blow you away how quick you've grown. I have a law firm that started with us 3 years ago with 9 employees. They have 120 now. I can't turn on the TV or drive down through my city without seeing their billboards. They're everywhere. And the reason is, well, a pretty dang good lawyer that runs the company. Absolutely. You got to be good at your job.
Right.
But he very early on was thinking, I'm not doing this. No. They can come to me like 1 out of every 500 cases. But man, for my job is to build a company, and the company is people who are going to do this. So he was very who focused from the very beginning. How do we get people? What are they going to do? Who are they? Where do I find them? What do they need when they're here? And as the CEO, he focused on who. And I mean, that guy, he's killing it. And most successful businesses I see that make it out of that 5-10 man slot or less, they make that switch to who. And that is the power of HR. It's the power of your people that you bring in.
Well, that leads me to my kind of next topic that I wanted to talk about. Was we've been kind of the early stuff here of like, how do you get started writing down paper? Like you identified, that works well at a small scale, and it worked well for us. And I highly recommend, if you're at that scale, that you should be doing that. But I would imagine that people listening to this episode too, some of them might work in large entrenched organizations that, like you said, have already got process in place. But I think anyone that's ever worked in a large company, they'll typically complain about something, efficiencies or bureaucracy or something. if I'm in a large organization and I see some inefficiencies with the process, or I want to start introducing automation in more of a larger organization, I would imagine it's not as easy as writing down your goals and trying to steer towards that. How do you advise people starting to see these problems? How do you get them to being able to use automation and become more efficient?
Well, I have two ideas on that. The first is a pithy answer, which is I wrote this book called People Processes. And when I wrote it originally, it was 400 single-spaced pages of HR training manual. It was like, let's crush people processes. And my publisher and editor said, Rhamy, what are you trying to do with the book? And I'm like, I want HR people to be able to take this book and do all this stuff. And they're like, well, okay, but that's a textbook. Is that what you're trying to do? And what we settled on is we want a book that an HR person can read, and everything in my book, it's going to give you a great outline and a place to start. But the real purpose of it is read it, make sure you know it, but it's short and quick, and it explains how to do things, but more importantly, why to do them. So some of our largest clients have come because the small HR person or entry-level guy or someone else gave my book to a board member, and they went, oh, this is why we scale up. This is how we do these things, and it's worth an investment. So I guess that's my quick plug. If you really are in a large organization, check out my book. It's not really for you if you're an HR genius and you're running a 1,000-man shop and it's going to be, oh God, yeah, you're right, I need processes. But if you hand that up to someone who's not focused on it, they're going to think about it. They're going to go, oh, okay, it's a great primer for that, and it'll take them an hour and a half to read. In a larger organization, there are many stakeholders. There are many different pieces. We're doing an RFP right now for a university. They have an accounting system that doesn't talk to their personnel system. There's a lot of manual entry data. Their benefits are completely divorced from anything related to payroll outside of like they're getting, paper applications, going to a chart and keying in expected deductions. When an employee is terminated, it triggers a series of events that takes hours, like 50 to 60 labor hours, to generate COBRA documentation, follow up, explain what they're going to do. Especially in the case of an involuntary termination, firing, the process is ridiculous. I mean, it's just, you could fire 20 people a year and that's a full-time, or not, if 20 people a year quit in a 1,000-man organization and it's a full-time job just to handle that. And I'm thinking, what is going on here? And it's because their systems don't talk. It's because they have no automation in place. And because of that, and this is the key, almost every step in their process sucks. Almost every step in their process doesn't accomplish the goal they want. They spend a crap ton on benefits, and yet their employees don't think it's very good. They onboard people and give them an employee handbook in paper. They have specific policies they want them to read, and yet HR is inundated by calls, and even department managers, chairs, assistant chairs are constantly asked about, hey, I'm getting pregnant. I'm pregnant. What's my maternity leave going to look like? How does this work? Why they have people leaving to go to work at other universities for marginal pennies, $2,000 a year pay raises on a $60,000 or $70,000 job with much less investment in flexible scheduling and these sorts of things. When you have all of these disparate systems and no automation, the real problem is not that it takes a ton of labor. It's that normally the individual steps don't accomplish their goals because no one has time to really communicate well why working at the university or your business is worthwhile. So I would say when you start seeing that, when you start not just seeing that this is a time sink, though that's enough of a reason. If you're a 40-man shop, it's almost always worth it to start investing in this stuff. Heck, a 20-man shop. But especially when you see not only are you spending a ton of money and time, it's not even accomplishing the basic goals of each system, then you really know that things are falling apart and you need to be investing in automation, because even with the money and the labor you're throwing at it, it's not accomplishing the goal.
Well, look, so take that example of that large organization you're talking about where they have none of their processes are talking to each other. All their systems are disparate and it would be, that's crazy that it'd be one person could have a full-time job just by dismissing 20 other people in the organization. So looking at that kind of rat's nest of a process, how do you get started? Like, what's the first thread you pull to start unraveling things?
Good question. So, in a large organization, and I'm sure any of you people who are working in there, massive change is hard, right? You always, and especially things like HR, payroll, benefits, it's really hard to do test cases, right? You've got 35 locations with 50 employees at each one of them. And it's like, I would like to try out your benefits communications method at one of the stores. It's like, well, okay, but they're the same benefits everywhere and you need to turn over your benefits to a new broker. There's like a ton of stuff most of the time to handle that. What I would say is when you're working in a larger organization, you have two options. One is a long roadmap and moving a lot of things at once to suddenly unify, which is scary as hell. There's a great case study. FedEx, huge company, about 2 years ago, changed from their internal systems to Workday, which is a great software platform. I think at the time they only took companies with more than 1,000 employees. Their ramp was 2.5 years, like literally 2.5 years from when they signed the contract is when they're going to take over. Yeah. And on the day that they took over, everyone's payroll history disappeared for like 2 weeks. It wasn't just exactly payroll history. It was like all the stuff that went into it. Like, why does this person have this payroll? Like, what's their pay grade? What are the performance review notes? Like, it was a disaster. They got it fixed and they're still on them. And I think they're quite happy actually. But doing it all at once is sometimes the only way to do it. If you're a true enterprise system, you're gonna have to swing for the fences sometimes to truly change something. And the answer for that is find a partner who's willing to invest the long time to actually get you there, live date, in a good time. If you're a 1,000-man company and someone's saying, yeah, in 45 days, man, we'll just take over that payroll stuff, handle all your benefits things, run. That's not, they're used to dealing with 7-man shops. That's not who you want. That's not what you want to do. The other alternative to that is to let people run test cases. We've run into this in some franchising organizations and even some places like some fast food restaurants. And what they wind up doing is they'll say, all right, well, let's do an evaluation. It costs more. That's the downside, at least per person. But what they'll do is say, hey, here's one store. I can't give you the full authority. We can't lay everything out, but I want you to step in and the things that you normally would automate at an entire company level, the things that you would do to make this work great, I want to pay you for this 50-man shop like it were a 200-man shop, and I want you to do it there because we're going to test this idea. And you'll find that often works out a lot of kinks, requires you find a good partner who wants to earn the whole company and is willing to invest the time. And a lot of times you can swing that from board approval standpoints or managerial approval, executive approval. If you're looking at one department, we have a trucking company and they moved their logistics department only, not the trucks. They have like 900 employees over there driving trucks and 40 people in an office. And they're like, look, we want to do the 40 people, even though we know that the main job is the truckers. We just got to understand what's going on here. We did that for 9 months, and then we were comfortable taking over the rest of the organization. So those are really your two options. If you're in a large organization, either a test case, which is going to cost more per person, but gives you a real understanding, or a long ramp to switch the whole company, where we do mini tests along the way. We pull in a bunch of stakeholders. We get lots of different opinions, that kind of world.
Well, I could see that having the test case would work, especially if, like you said, with needing to get board approval and everything. Like it's a lot easier to start with having that large organization. Like it's a lot easier to get started with the just screw up in that one spot as opposed to screwing up when you swing for the fences, because that does happen from time to time, right?
Right. Well, and the other thing to think about is another way you can kind of adopt this, and this is just mainly HR. You probably can't do it with an app. Is talk with some of the these vendors. Maybe it's our company, maybe it's another one, and say, what is it you would do? Let's bring you on as a consultant. Like, I want to implement. Like, I guess we could use your app as an example, Tim. We could say, let's automate this one little piece. We want to try it out. Maybe we can't get authority for you to do the whole thing in your organization, or what we often find, and this is one reason we have our academy. An HR person can say, hey, I can get approval for a training course for a 13-week program that I'm going to apply internally. And it may not take me all the way there, but it's going to make huge improvements. And then we say, look, what we're doing is this HR company's process. Now that we've got the basics in place, I'd like to bring in the tools and get rid of some old vendors and replace the new vendors. But you can also kind of internally pilot some of the things related to HR, at least. I don't know how it would work in your world, but in our world, they come to us sometimes and say, hey, I can't get the whole company to move, but I want to use your process in my little department. I'm going to do it. I got my assistant here. We're going to take care of this. I want to change how we communicate our benefits. Can I take a training and figure out what we want to do? So that's another way that we've wound up gaining very large clients. Just the internal pressure of, we're already doing this. We're doing what this people processes outline says. We just want to now expand it out.
That, one thing I've been thinking about while we've been talking here is I think a lot of times people, people just want their problem solved fast, right? And what I'm hearing is usually going through this HR, like making sure you have things automated and getting everything working together. It's like you can see the benefits, but it's going to take a while, and people just want things now. And a lot of times, I would imagine when you have people on their shows, this would be the part of the program where they're like, so what software can I use to really just put it in right away and get it all done? But what I'm gathering, and what I might be spoiling your answer here, but I would assume if somebody comes to you and says, what software can I use in my business to automate things? Like, I'm sure you have your picks, but for the most part, it's probably going to be, well, what's the point of the software, right? Like, or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is. Maybe I'll set you up here. Maybe there is a silver bullet solution here that we can just implement, and all of our problems are solved, right?
Right. Well, every person's different, every company's different, and every culture is different. So what we have at our company are our own tools and third-party tools that we are, that we've built into our ecosystem, however that, you want to put that. Some of which we developed internally ourselves, some of which we've, bought a off-the-shelf timekeeping system and, integrated it on the back end with our stuff, whatever it takes to put all these different processes in. And what I think people don't understand is that we will automate anything you like, and we can help you learn what it is you should automate. But they're separate things, and I think small business people in particular often kind of go, with big business, they're saying, here are all of our processes, we want them automated, and that I got the tools for that. Call me up. We'll put together a proposal. You've got 7 different vendors doing it. Let's get one. Let's make sure it all talks. Outstanding. But in small business, it's often that they don't even know where to start. They come to us and say, I want a system where I can, I want to make sure we're tracking people's time off requests. So I needed to go into payroll. I've got this handbook that I got off the internet 3 years ago. I got I don't have any benefits, but the Aflac lady comes out every 6 months. And I want to automate it because it's killing me. It's taking a ton of time. And I say, absolutely, let's do it. We'll automate it and we'll simplify your life, and you'll go from spending, one of your assistants or you spend, the business owner spending 10 hours every payroll trying to get this crap right to spending, 15 minutes. And that's great. But now that it's automated, what's the next step? And the answer is you got to improve some of this stuff, So it's a 2-part equation. What are we, are we automating? Are we saving labor? Are we making it so that this isn't a time sink? I mean, you look at modern companies and you got people doing grunt work, managers taking paper timesheets at the work site, bringing them back and correcting them, sending them to some poor person in the office who then takes them all and types them into a spreadsheet that goes to approval, who then types them in on another website to pay the people. And then they get an accounting report and they go and they send that to the bookkeeper who goes and types that in. What are you doing? That's a waste of, I mean, but the only return of automating that stupid process is saving a bunch of time and hopefully reducing errors and all those other great advantages. But that's very different than, hey, why do I have these people on hourly? Why do I have some people clocking in and out and not others? What are the processes? What are the thoughts behind why we award certain amounts of PTO versus others? What sort of flexible time are we going to offer? Can people work from home? And it's really two sets of questions. Can we automate, and what does that look like? And a lot of companies, that's they've got their stupid processes and they want them automated, and we can do that. And especially in big companies, that's a lot of it. When you think about a company that's got 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 employees, they know they need to improve the processes, but a lot of them come to us because they say, what we do is working. It's just crazy expensive in time, and we make mistakes every 30th time we need to do it, and we need to do it every week. When you have that, like, automation's the answer there. But then you free up that time, and I want them to then use that time to improve what it is they do.
Gosh, I could talk to you about this for hours. I think it's endlessly fascinating. And we've had, to your point, like, we've had people come to us before at our development shop and say, we've got this process where people type out their time card, like they write it on a piece of paper, hand it to their foreman, they approve it, but then they have to type it into another spreadsheet, which gets approved by somebody else. And it's like just this whole nightmare where it's like, well, can't this be a clock-in app? But you got to start somewhere. So I think people will be able to take a lot of what we talked about here in this episode and at least get that first part down of actually writing down your goals and figuring out how you can make steps towards them. So do you have any final thoughts, Rhamy, about, like, how people can get started with this automation process, or any tips or tricks that you want to leave people with here?
You got to understand your processes internally first. So I recommend that. I mean, I cannot stress how important it is that the owner or management spend some time looking at their internal actions and what that actually accomplishes. That's going to be your biggest return. A new piece of software, and look, we're a software company. That's what we do. But a new piece of software isn't going to solve underlying crap that if you treat your people bad or you don't communicate with them well, the packaging isn't necessarily going to help. But having said that, most companies are already using an outsourced payroll provider, some sort of third-party timekeeping system, an accounting system, a benefits broker, and none of those systems talk to one another well. When they hire somebody, they may be going on to 6 different 401k benefits websites, putting in information. They are trying to figure out how that person's costs are going to be split up among accounting. Maybe 60% of the time they're over in this department, 40% over here, and that's a lot of manual work. They then go and put them in a timekeeping software so that they can clock in and out using their physical clocks. They have another system where they actually request their time off or allocate their time for budgeting. Maybe they don't. Maybe it's in the same timekeeping system, but it doesn't allow them to. It allows them to request time off and keeps track of the balance, but doesn't actually know if they wind up putting more in on payroll than they did in the timekeeping. Maybe the systems aren't talking that way. And then when it's all done, they put it all into payroll where all their labor costs are, and then they have to turn around and do some ridiculous breakout giant spreadsheet to put it into their accounting system. And none of it helps them understand what's going on. That alone, if you're in that situation, and that can happen in a 10-man company, you're already spending a ton of money using all these different pieces. Your benefits broker, all these different things have costs associated with them. And what we can do that I think is relatively unique in the market is we can unify those, even in a 10 or 20-man shop, and make it a single point of contact. I don't want to call it one-stop shopping. One of my favorite clients calls it one throat to choke. When something goes wrong with any of this crap, I know who to find. And that's what I can guarantee, is that we can put it all in one place, make it all work. And it's easier to get started in a 20, 30, 40, 50-man company, even 100-man company, to make those changes than it is by the time you're at 500 or 1,000. Every time you delay and you have these separate systems growing into their own monster for years and years, it's more work to unify them.
And I think we found a good title for the episode of One Throat to Choke. I've never heard that one before.
One Throat to Choke. Yeah. Willis, if you're listening, I'll send you this episode. You told me that 3 years into my business, and I've never forgotten it.
Those colloquialisms you pick up over time. It's like they just somehow seep into my mind just from watching so much TV. But I digress. So one last thing, Rhamy, where can people learn more about people processes? Because I'm sure there's lots of people listening to this where they're like, "Yep, I'm in that exact same boat. I need to talk to you." So how can people find you?
I would love for you to go to peopleprocesses.com. There's a contact us in the bottom right-hand corner. You can live chat with us immediately. Let us know. You'll set a meeting. We're not a big company. We handle employee benefits and payroll and HR for 1,000-man companies with our little team of about 20. So you're going to talk with me if you reach out. I'd love to hear from you, peopleprocesses.com. You can also find us on Facebook /peopleprocesses, Twitter, LinkedIn. We monitor all of those. We'd love to talk with you. And we do have our podcast, People Processes, available on iTunes, Google Play, all those places. If you just want more kind of hearing us chat and learning about compliance updates, interviews with other business owners, feel free to subscribe on there. If you go to People Processes and tell us that you heard from us on this podcast, please let me know. I want to let Tim know that it came from you guys, and we'll also have some special deals just for y'all.
It'd be shocking if somebody was actually listening to this episode and came. No, I'm just kidding. I would be very pleased to hear that, though. So yeah, please do let them know that you found them through Constant Variables. And Rhamy, thanks again for joining us today. And we hope people took away quite a bit here on how to help automate their HR processes.
Love to help. Thank you.
A big thanks to Rhamy Alejeal for joining me today on the podcast. You can find more about his company, People Processes, on all the social networks, like he said, as well as peopleprocesses.com. Show notes for this episode can be found at constantvariables.co. You can get in touch with us by emailing hello@constantvariables.co. I'm at Tim Bornholt on Twitter, and the show is at CV_podcast. We're also on Instagram. I think it's Constant Variables Podcast, so check that out. Today's episode was edited by the Zoftig Jordan Daoust. One quick favor, if you've got just a couple minutes, please head over to the Apple Podcasts app and leave us a review. I know everyone talks about that all the time, but that seriously is the way that people get higher ratings in the iTunes charts, and that really helps us grow our show. So take 2 minutes, head to constantvariables.co/review, and we'll link you right there. You don't even have to worry about downloading that app or whatever. Just go to constantvariables.co/review, leave us a review. I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. This episode was brought to you by the Jed Mahonis Group. If you're looking for a technical team who can help make sense of mobile software development, give us a shout at jmg.mn.